Welcome and thank you for tuning in to today's history podcast, which will cover the topic of Algeria's decolonization and fight for independence. I am your host for today, Cole, and along with me here is Riku.
Generally, this discussion today will cover the core principles of decolonization and its application of it within Algerian history, its independence movement, struggles, and successes. First and foremost, what genuinely is decolonization?
Essentially, decolonization was the process in which colonies became independent of their colonizing country, through increasingly grown nationalism and the will to rebel among the native population. With the end of World War II, the European colonizing countries did not have the money and political stability to deal with uprisings in faraway colonies, allowing these colonies to successfully decolonize. Could you preface Algeria's decolonization? How did it come under colonial control, and how did its decolonization movement start?
From 1517 to 1830, Algeria was one of the Western Ottoman states. However, it was ultimately lost due to European intervention on piracy and repeated attacks on European naval ships. European intervention consisted of attacks on behalf of Spain, Denmark, France, and England. However, the colony ended up falling to the French following their own organized invasion in 1830. France quickly seized Algiers and neighboring territories in an escalated naval blockade, following an argument between Hussein Dey, the Algerian leader at the time, and the French consul. Initially, resistance forces were created under Ahmed Bey Ben Mohammed Cherif in the east, and other nationalist forces in the west. They began efforts on behalf of reaching treaties between France and the nationalist force. However, such would often fail, and tensions would continue to be created for the 132 years Algeria was a French colony. Could you list the significance and roles of nationalist and revolutionary groups during the Algerian War for Independence?
During French Algeria, nationalist leaders and revolutionary groups had been developing on behalf of achieving their own domestic independence. As they had acknowledged that peace wouldn't be attainable through nonviolent means, ultimately, many became increasingly radical, according to Encyclopedia Britannica. Messali Hadj, the founder of the Party of the Algerian People before World War II, ultimately brought out the initial roots for anti-French sentiment and encouraged Algerian nationalism. Under the control of France, the party was abolished in the 1930s. In the mid-1940s, the party was replaced by the Movement for the Triumph of Democratic Liberties, which was generally more radical than its predecessor, as it was coupled with a paramilitary group, the Special Organization, abbreviated OS. The colonial police in the 1950s discovered many who had ties to the movement, and their major leaders were incarcerated. In 1954, former Special Organization members founded the Revolutionary Committee of Unity and Action, which would later become the party that successfully achieved independence, FLN, or the National Liberation Front. All prior information was cited from Encyclopedia Britannica, History.com, and The Atlantic. Generally, how was independence achieved in the long run?
Independence was achieved through the fighting of the Algerian War of Independence, which had begun on October 31st, 1954. The National Liberation Front released a pamphlet that urged forward a sovereign Algerian state. The pamphlet called for social democracy and equal citizenship within what would be established as a predominantly Islamic Algeria. Domestically, during the Algerian War, guerrilla warfare would be utilized, and globally, diplomatic pressures would be placed on the United Nations. Many battles would be continuously fought between French colonizers and Algerian revolutionaries.
The Algerian War was generally constructed of many battles, consisting of, pardon me if I pronounce any of these names wrong, the Battle of Ouaganda, Battle of Algiers from 1956 to 1957, the Battle of Bab el-Boukeche, Battle of Bab el-Oud, Battle of Douar Souadek, Battle of Bouzegza, First Battle of El Diouf, Operation Jumelles, Operation Bluebird, Operation Veronique, Ambush of Palestro, and the Battle of Filtville.
The 7-year Algerian War came to a conclusion when France and the National Liberation Front signed the Evian Accords. It was a violent decolonization process as there was a war, the Algerian War of Independence. In 1830, France's colonial forces took occupation of the Algerian state, commencing a period of exploitation of the Algerian people. After 132 years under colonial rule, the Algerian people came out victorious and finally gained independence. Algerian revolutionary groups did not experience competition on behalf of becoming a stronger nationalist force, but rather competition between the French and their revolutionary abilities. The country of Algeria was founded on July 5th, 1962. Currently, what is the relationship between Algeria and France?
Following its Independence Day of July 5th, 1962, Algeria still upholds questionable relations with its colonizer. To this day, France tries to cover up the atrocities that were committed. France did not even recognize that this conflict was a war until 1999. France also tries to point to the fact that many French soldiers lost their lives and were injured, and although this is true, it was to a lesser degree than the Algerian losses. Also, French President Emmanuel Macron was the first leader to address the conflict since their defeat against the Algerian nationalists, and he stated, "The Algerian War is today absent from our political memory and the subject of a conflict of memories like the Holocaust was." He added, "We don't talk about this, we crush it." Alright, that's all for today, folks. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to tune in next time.